And without further ado, I would like to introduce our first panel, which is titled "From Launchpads to Lending in the Ordinal Space." We have some of our iconic founders up here, including Nick, my boss from Gamma, and Charlie Spears is moderating, co-founder of Blockspace Media, Brian, OrdinalsBot, and also Robin from Liquidium. So give them a warm welcome, and we'll kick off.
Thanks. I guess we don't need to do intros, and also, I feel like I've seen you guys on just about every continent by now, so we kind of know each other.
Ordinals Antarctica
Exactly,
in January.
Ordinals Africa and Ordinals Antarctica. That's the left. That's what's left.
Sponsored by Gamma.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so let's back really far up, and I like to imagine that you're a user who goes to a bunch of different blockchains, and you use different apps and dApps, and you're pretty familiar with this wallet connect, jump right in, start using the app experience in these other blockchains. Then you come to Bitcoin, and it can look a little familiar, but it also may seem a little weird and clunky. And I would just invite you guys, if you can, imagine you're talking to this user, and you have them cornered so they can't leave, and you're and try to explain to this user why it feels a little bit different on Bitcoin. Are we trying to replicate the same app experience? Or, this is an open question. Imagine that you're trying to justify why Bitcoin just structurally feels different to the average user than other blockchains. Go.
They're both looking at me, so I guess. I think we're all building products on Bitcoin, and that comes, when you build a product, one of the biggest things is UX, right? How are users going to interact with that product? We've been around since the beginning, most of us, so Web3 has opened up so many UX problems, right? It's not an easy thing. People are used to web shops and e-commerce where you just click a button, put your credit card in. And Ethereum went through the same thing. Wallets and stuff weren't ready for NFTs for a year after the NFT hype cycle. MetaMask had NFTs way after that. So I think that, UX has always been a problem or a thing to overcome in Web3. So it did pretty good on Ethereum. We had obviously massive retail boom in 2021. And then when Ordinals came along, it was start again, basically, because none of this was on Bitcoin. The wallets on Bitcoin at the time were for Bitcoin enthusiasts who love to get deep and dirty with GitHub tutorials and things like that. And that's not your average user. So building products in that space, we had to essentially start from scratch. We could look at what was working on other chains and other UX flows that was working on other chains and replicate that. But yeah, it's been a whole different beast to build on Bitcoin, to say the least. There's no smart contracts. People are just now understanding what a smart contract is, and then it's okay, forget that, come to Bitcoin, it's completely different, which is very scary for the average user. So it's our job to make it as least scary as we can and as easy as we can, and bring people over. And I must say, in the last year and a half, it's happened much faster than it did on Ethereum. I think because some great projects were already coming from stacks like Gamma and Liquidium and stuff like that, and Xverse and Leather. So we had a head start a little bit with stacks, but yeah, it's been really exciting to see how fast the innovations actually happen. So I personally think we're ready for the prime time now, basically after a year and a half.
What do you guys?
I think that Bitcoin feels so different because it is very different. It uses UTXOs versus most other chains, most smart contract compatible chains don't use UTXOs. And I think once you understand what a UTXO is and how it works, Bitcoin makes so much sense. And I think that actually UTXOs, or a UTXO-based chain, is actually more beautiful than Ethereum or something like that. Essentially, for the people that don't know UTXOs, it's like let's say you have 1 Bitcoin in your wallet. What might happen is if you send 0.1 Bitcoin to somebody, you're actually sending 1 Bitcoin to this person, and you're receiving back 0.9 Bitcoin. And this is also something we're seeing, for example, with runes. A lot of people think that the runes user experience is very clunky because runes are also UTXO based, which means now if I'm trying to send runes to multiple people, what happens sometimes is that I have to wait for the first transaction to confirm in order to send my next runes. And that's somebody who is coming from another chain, it is like so unintuitive to them, and it doesn't make sense. And I agree, but there are ways around it on Bitcoin. And I think with regular Bitcoin, we already kind of achieved this, where we use unconfirmed UTXOs as an input, and then use them again, and so on. We can chain UTXOs. In theory, we can do the same thing with runes, and I think everybody is building towards that. But it's still so early, and we're still like figuring out the user experience, that it might just take us a little bit more time to get there. But yeah, I think UTXO-based chains are just very, very different from smart contract-based chains.
Yeah, I mean, of course, echo everything you guys have both said. I think like one of the advantages that we have on Bitcoin, even though totally agree things are maybe a little bit clunky now, we do get to sort of speed run the correct decisions that were made on Ethereum, Solana, elsewhere, and we can give credit to them for setting some correct foundations for us to be able to do that. So to give one just mind-blowing example of this. About 18 months ago, despite Bitcoin being around for nearly 15 years, there were 0 wallets that could engage with a DApp. Now there are a dozen, and more by the minute. And then, of course, DApps themselves, Launchpads, marketplaces, lending platforms, DEXs. These were, one of maybe a couple, and they couldn't really do much of anything, and maybe had sort of questionable methods of doing things with your Bitcoin. And now we've moved in a period of 18 months to something that is more and more trustless in nature, and we're often using things like PSBTs, partially signed Bitcoin transactions, to atomically have swaps happen rather than having somebody custody your Bitcoin unless they need to. So I think fully agree we have a little ways to go, but I think in the last 18 months we've done what took Ethereum, say, 6 years to do. And I think it's just now, as more and more people have been attracted to the space, it's been more and more teams that are hungry to improve that user experience and win users. And competition is always a good thing in that way. It kind of helps everyone be better.
I just also like to say that as builders, there's nothing more motivating than 10,000 degens just screaming at you how shit your product is, and I don't want to click on
great.
it, right? Oh, it's amazing. So it's very motivating.
I mean, the topic of these degens, these degens spin up 1 billion meta protocols in the span of that, in the span of the past year and a half. And you guys, as Launchpads, lending, builders, I've felt this myself. What do you even concentrate on to build? So much of the reason why you guys are still here is because you have navigated pretty well the absolute craziness of the past 2 years. How do you figure out what to build for, and probably more importantly, how do you figure out what not to build?
It's so difficult, because as builders, you're like, oh, this is the new thing. Everyone's really talking about it, but it's a death sentence for a dev team to just stop what they're doing and shift to something else, because you'll never get stuff done if you keep shifting around. So when we started, it was quite simple: inscriptions, boom, drag and drop, easy peasy. And then all of a sudden, Domo launched BRC20, and it's like, okay, fungible tokens are here. So we kind of dropped the ball on that at the beginning, even though it was kind of Domo launched Ordi through OrdinalsBot as well, which is quite funny. But so we were like, is BRC20 got to be a thing? And we're like, of course not. Domo stays at the top of the Google Docs. It's don't use this, it's useless. So we took that to heart and ignored it. But the degens came in and said, no, actually, we've got to build $1 billion market out of this. So that was, it's hard to tell what ones are going to win and what ones are not. One of the worst ones I seen was someone was doing a meta protocol on Twitter with photos of Post-it notes. And then the first person to post the Post-it note gets the ticker. It was like, so that was the real top signal. But yeah, so there was, it's hard, is what I'm trying to say. But we always want to keep our eye open and try and keep our hand in it. And if it's a quick win, we'll do it. If it's not, we'll file it away, And if it's completely game changing, then we'll definitely focus on it. Runes was a shock to the system for everybody. You know, Casey launched a blog post with no concept of how he was going to build it, but every builder in the space started building a launchpad for runes without any concept of what they're actually going to be, which is very dangerous because obviously he can just change it, and he did change it quite a lot during that time. So yeah, it's hard to build when the ecosystem's really kind of in that really growing stage.
Yeah, I think it's a mix of having kind of a long-term view on things and also staying very agile and being open to like pivoting quickly. But personally, I really like to look at the things from a long-term time perspective. Like obviously, yes, maybe there is a new layer 2 launching, maybe there's a new meta protocol coming out, but is this actually going to be something that contributes to the long-term vision of what we envision Bitcoin and the crypto financial ecosystem to be long-term? Or is this something that is short-term attractive to the people and we might be able to extract some value out of it for the short term, but in the long term, we basically wasted dev time on it to get into this new and shiny thing. Yeah, I think looking at it from a long-term perspective and then being agile and quickly adapting to it. So for example, we always knew that NFTs on Bitcoin are great, right? Like everybody in the Stacks ecosystem always wanted NFTs on Bitcoin, and that's how we actually got into it. And so the long-term vision was clear. We want non-fungible tokens on Bitcoin. Nobody knew how they are going to happen, and Stacks NFTs might have been the first stepping stone to that. But then, kind of like Ordinals came out, and we thought, okay, this might be kind of the next step towards real Bitcoin NFTs. And I think Stacks NFTs are like definitely have a reason to exist. But kind of the use case is shifting around it, and we decided to kind of go the other route, but still keep the long-term plan of having NFTs on Bitcoin and kind of creating financial ecosystems around it.
Yeah, I would totally agree there. I think this is actually all three of us on speaking just by chance. Like we sort of began in Stacks, and I think for in some ways a little bit principled reasons, because we wanted to be close to Bitcoin. Like I don't think any of us are like outright maxis, but we do believe that the best ideas ultimately make it back to Bitcoin. And I hope I'm not misspeaking for you guys in saying that those are sort of like core to all of our philosophies. And so Stacks NFTs, to your point, were sort of like where we all landed as like the current best way for us to do that when I think we all probably made it around 2021, 2022 to Stacks, and then when I think we were all like instantly looking for ways to be even closer to Bitcoin, and I know some of us, I'm pretty sure you were, Bruff, were part of this like working group that were looking to find a way to do NFTs on L1 Bitcoin. We actually came up with a non-Ordinals method of doing so that was absolutely terrible user experience. It was like you could create it, but you couldn't ever do anything with it. You could just look at it, and it would, looks kind of nice. But of course, when we saw Ordinals come out, it was like perfect timing, and we were already in this mindset of like, hey, let's actually kind of pretty much all of us immediately move to Ordinals, and that was like the solution we were looking for to be closer to L1. And so. Like from the Gamma perspective, and kind of to answer your question more directly, I totally agree with Robin. Like having this long-term approach where we ultimately believe that like the highest value assets will end up on L1 Bitcoin. That's why we've really focused the Gamma platform towards fine artists and creators that are really like dedicating their entire career to creating art. And preserving that on Bitcoin. Like right now, it might cost tens of dollars or hundreds of dollars to preserve your work. During certain meta protocol days and probably into the future, that may cost hundreds to thousands of dollars. And so, in our view, like a 10K PFP collection may not be as popular on L1 Bitcoin in 3 years as it is today. So I mean. kudos to you if you've been here early and got your 10K inscribed. But like into the future, we sort of have our eyes set on L2s like Stacks, like others, to sort of help scale those use cases where maybe permanence isn't the most important factor to you as a creator. So yeah, I think like just focusing on that long-term vision and then deciding like what fits in there and what doesn't. And for Gamma, that was hard for us because like, you know, our person we're serving more than anything is creators. And so when runes come about, certain collectors would be like, ooh, I want to do XYZ with runes. And we're like, well, you know, if we think of a use case that serves creators, sure, but until then, we're kind of going to stay out of that one.
Yeah, like corporate focus is really, really important, and agile decision making, as you said, Robin. And I feel a lot of this is determined by the dev cycle, like heartbeat, where like dev cycles are worth their weight in gold right now for our ecosystem. And this makes me think about just the overall developer experience on Bitcoin. And I've reflected on this a lot, where I used to think you could just go to the Bitcoin developer store and pick one off the shelf and hire them, but that's certainly not been the case. And in fact, I think all you guys have had to train this knowledge internally significantly. What is the developer experience like on Bitcoin? What are the challenges? How is it different than the developer experience on other blockchains? Why is it more difficult?
Do you want the pessimistic
No,
answer?
give me the black pill, man. Yeah, tell me.
No, I think that Bitcoin is since Bitcoin works so differently from all other chains, and Bitcoin previously, like before Ordinals, basically served only one use case, which is transferring Bitcoin and storing Bitcoin. Like there wasn't necessarily any use case where you would want to learn Bitcoin development, because like what would you develop in Bitcoin, right? Like, yeah, just doesn't make too much sense. So all of the developer tools were on other chains. There was basically no tutorials on Bitcoin and so on. So I think it was like, especially in the beginning, it was very terrible for developers. And also Bitcoin from a programming stance, like you kind of have to go very, very low level on the code versus Ethereum has solidity, Stacks has clarity, which makes way more sense for traditional developers. But I think we're getting there. There is more and more developers building dev tools, even something like connecting wallets. On Ethereum, we have WAGMI and like Wallet Connect, which is a unified standard across all wallets. I know that the team at Leather is trying to do a unified standard. Laser Eyes is another dev tool that is trying to give you a tool where you can connect into all of the wallets. That previously didn't exist, and you kind of had to like integrate every single wallet on your own. And that's what we did. Like every single wallet works differently. And the number of
you guys not like for the people out there, like this has been a pain point in our industry for so long.
100%. Yeah. The amount of cron jobs and API calls that we have is just ridiculous. We had to reach out to Vercel to get our cron job limit increased because we just reached it. Like, yeah. But yeah, I think it's getting better, and more people are getting into it. And there's also way more focus on Rust now, and people tend to love Rust once they learn it.
I think the key word you said there was standard as well. Ethereum was also a shit show at the beginning, right? I mean, you know, without ERC and kind of the ERC 21 coming along and an ERC 20, that it's just so clear that standards are needed as well. And I think in the Ordinal side, even though there's no smart contracts, there still is some sort of standards that need to be in place. So wallet standards would be fantastic. Inscription standards would be really, really good as well in terms of, you know, how do these things get displayed, right? All of our products are displaying ordinals to users. So if we all display them in different ways, then that's not standard, right? So, you know, my ordinal might look like completely different on Gamma or Liquidium because we're all doing different things. But if you had a standard where where everyone's obviously playing from the same playbook, then they would look the same. It's exactly the same as Internet Explorer 6 back in the day. I'm a front-end developer, so I felt that pain of when you're trying to design something in Chrome and then you look at it in Internet Explorer and it's completely different from what it looks like in Firefox until you had standards in place, you know. So I think that we have been looking at it as well and trying to make open some conversations about that. Metadata standards and also visualization standards, wallet standards. I'm sure there's a whole load of standards you can build around the fungible token ecosystem as well. So I'm excited about that because that's when, but you need more developers in the space, more people who are really used to maybe creating standards and running open source, you know, projects and things like that. But that'll come over time, I think. You know, you need to remember, like, Bitcoin was the first ever blockchain, so all these really, really smart blockchain people started on Bitcoin and then left and went to Ethereum and then went to Solana and went all other places, but now they're all coming back. But, you know, so I think that this year, as it becomes more popular, we'll see a big developer community coming back, and I'm looking forward to it because then standards will grow out of that.
Yeah, I have a bit of a funny tidbit from like early days. There were, you know, no PSBT marketplace solutions out yet, although several teams were sort of trying to figure it out. And at the time, like, the PSBT itself was around for a little while, but there was very little, like, anywhere on the internet. And I think it's funny, like, normally you Google something even remotely related to what you're trying to do, and there's like 1,000 Google results or something. There were 0 Google results for anything related to certain mechanics related to PSBTs. And so, like, yeah, just early days, not a ton of tooling then, and even just people who've done a certain use case once successfully. But I will say on the bright side, Bitcoin's simplicity and elegance means that there often aren't like 84 ways to do a particular action. And so I find it really interesting that Gamma, Ordinals Market, Orin, and others like Magic Eden pretty much all independently came to the same PSBT marketplace solution. And, you know, and then plenty of teams after that, you know, sort of used PSBTs for other things other than just simple, you know, trades. And so, you know, there is some beauty of Bitcoin's elegance, and I think there is maybe like something attractive to, you know, a developer who's looking for, you know, like getting really down to like as like low level as you're gonna get in blockchain, and like try to like figure out like the simplest way to achieve something. It's probably gonna be on Bitcoin.
Bitcoin is simplicity, but it's disguised as complexity. It's very interesting. And what you were saying, that there still exists this blue ocean for defining standards and convention for our industry, even now 2 years into the Ordinals narrative. So I want to pull really far back as I ask kind of one final topic, which is, let's do some moon math. You guys are familiar with the various pie charts of, here's Ethereum, here's the percentage of NFTs like in relation to Ethereum market cap, and here's Bitcoin, here's the token market cap and the NFT market cap. What do you guys think about this? And do you think that this is at all indicative of where we're headed over the next few years?
Looking at the Ethereum guy, yeah. It's hard to say. I mean, when you look, I lived through the 2021 bull run. I launched my collection on Ethereum in 2021, right at the right time. It minted out in a weekend, and I quit my job the next day. It was the craziest weekend of my life. But so I mean, talk about hype cycle. I mean, there was Eminem with a Bored Ape on the Tonight Show. Like, that was like the max of the hype. Will we ever get to those levels again? Even on Ethereum, it's hard to say. However, you can't deny the scale of Bitcoin, the size of Bitcoin, and the amount of Bitcoin that was completely dormant during that time. It was like 10 times bigger, I think, is that the number? I think that's the number that's in my head. So in terms of a market cap, like, it was huge, you know. So that was completely dormant, and it still is in a sense. So right now we've only cracked the surface of, you know, that liquidity as well. practically. So I think that when people start to realize, okay, I don't need to bridge my Bitcoin, I don't need to wrap it, I don't need to do anything, I can just spend my Bitcoin, and naturally the thing I'm spending, I'm putting onto Bitcoin, so I even get Bitcoin back. It's like you're not, so I think there's got to be a huge unlock eventually for people who want to dabble in these digital assets and protocols and DeFi. So yeah, I think it's got to be massive. I've no idea about numbers, but I think just by looking at the scale of the size of Bitcoin, it's clear that if it gets to those levels again, and Bitcoin's a massive contender with all the fun things that Ethereum had, it's kind of a no-brainer that it should be, again, 10 times bigger then.
I think there is a very big difference between Bitcoin and most other blockchains. So most other blockchains are a development environment first. They are a blockchain for developers to come in and build applications on them, versus, and then they are a currency second kind of thing, right? Versus Bitcoin is the other way around. It is a store of value or a currency or whatever you want to call it first, and a development environment second. So Ethereum, like, it makes a lot of sense that maybe a stable coin on Ethereum almost has the same market cap as Ethereum, because kind of like that is what Ethereum for. It is for having alternative assets on there, for having applications on there, and that the applications hold like massive value compared to the size of Ethereum. Because frankly, like, why, like, Ethereum is an inferior currency to Bitcoin. That's my take, at least. So therefore, a lot of people on Bitcoin, they want to hold on to the currency. They want to have exposure to Bitcoin. On Ethereum, I only have exposure to Ethereum because I use it for the gas fees. On Bitcoin, I actually want to have Bitcoin, and I want to retain value in there. And everything that I'm doing on Bitcoin is to get more Bitcoin, right? So it makes sense that the percentage of assets, like the value of assets compared to the value of Bitcoin, is much smaller than on Ethereum. And same thing, like value locked on Bitcoin as a blockchain compared to value locked on the applications on Bitcoin will also be smaller. Yeah, I think that is the main difference.
So 2 trillion.
20 trillion.
20 trillion. Yeah, so it's funny that you mentioned, like, we've all seen this graph of, Ethereum and then things on top.
It's in all of our pitch decks, basically.
Say it again?
It's in all of our pitch decks.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because that chart was literally in Gamma's, like, investor pitch deck in 2021. And at the time, I like to tell this story just to show, like, how far we as like an ecosystem have come, and it's like why I'm so optimistic and bullish is, like, we had this pitch that, hey, we think that things deserve to come back to Bitcoin and the best ideas will come back to Bitcoin. And we talked to some really, like, respectable VCs at the time. This was like, we were in the Stanford Blockchain Accelerator and kind of had access to a lot of, really respected investors. And I cannot tell you how many of them literally laughed at us and said, why would I want to go to Bitcoin? Like, that's ridiculous. Like, who uses Bitcoin anymore? Like, Ethereum is where it's at. That's the future. And we're like, no, we really believe that, like, this will happen. And now here we are years later, and it sort of, like, the take now is like, oh, it was inevitable. Like, it was always going to happen this way. But things aren't necessarily inevitable unless you, like, start grabbing your picks and hatches and go for it. So I'm glad we're all here building, and I think that to more specifically answer your question without giving an exact number, I think that we'll see many multiples in growth from here, just as we went from impossible to, to where we are today.
I just wanted to clarify something from what I said. I think percentage-wise, the charts are not going to look like we put them in the pitch decks. I think that Bitcoin is just going to grow much larger as its ecosystem is growing. I do think that the ecosystem is becoming extremely huge, but I think that Bitcoin will continue growing at the same pace.
So if you're not building on Bitcoin, what are you doing? These guys are, and more of the people in the audience are, and I'll be here. So thank you so much, guys. Launchpads, lending, and everything else. Cheers.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.